Hey guys, Solomon here. Hope you're having a great day. Today we're going to be looking at the Caro-Kann defense and kind of starting a new series, right? This is going to be aimed towards beginner chess players, rated, 1,000, 1,200 and below. And, those players that are also just getting right into the Caro-Kann, right? So, even if you're not a beginner, but you're learning this opening, this could be a good place to start, right? A lot of my opening videos to this point are very in-depth, covering a ton of lines. In this one, I'm kind of just giving you the framework, right? Giving you the fence line and letting you fill in the gaps. But more than anything, giving you the most important and valuable information, right? So these videos are supposed to be, digestible and, a video in which case you could watch it, go into a game and have a solid idea of what you're doing. So that's the goal behind it. We're going to be starting out this beginner series on the Caro-Kann by looking at the advanced variation, because if you look at it statistically online, that is the move that you're going to see most of the time. Let's jump right into it. So here we have this move of e4. We're playing the Caro-Kann, striking in the center. We're now going to be looking at the advance with e5, right? This is played the most if you look at online chess. And when I myself play the Caro-Kann, I see this move all the time of e5. What do we do against this? Well, we're going to be looking at two moves, right? One of them is this move of g6, which is actually probably more geared towards intermediate players, which I will share, right? 1,200 plus. But we will first be looking at this move of c5, which also works for intermediate and advanced. But I think for beginners especially, this is where I would start, right? Now, many may wonder, okay, why are we playing c6, d5, and then c5, right? Why are we moving this pawn twice? Because in the French defense, right, we're playing e6, right, d4, and c5. Notice we have the same exact position here, but instead of a pawn on e7, we have a pawn on e6 in the French, right? Why would we ever want a position in which case we have one pawn backwards, right? That's what I thought. When I first saw this line, I always just thought it was kind of silly. Why remove the same pawn twice? But one of my students who plays this, right, he's very, solid player, just past 1900, gearing up for 2000 now, Adam Safer, shout out. He asked me, what if I don't want my pawn on e6? Right? What if here in this position as a Caro-Kann player, I don't want my pawn here? And I went, okay, that's kind of interesting, right? Because probably the biggest, at least most famous disadvantage of the French defense is that you get the French bishop, right? With the pawn here, that bishop is just not very good, right? There's no way around that. Well, now we're kind of playing an improved French. Whole idea being that we're going to try to get this bishop activated specifically against a move like knight f3. We're going to pin that knight. Right, we got to pin that knight, and we're going to play a French defense kind of position, but without that French bishop, which is a huge advantage for a multitude of reasons, which we will get into. Now, we play this move with c5, right? There's a little bit of a background, on why I think that this is, a very valid option instead of playing the French, which isn't bad, but, both have their advantages. Okay, so we have this position here. Most of the time, white's not going to take, right? They'll play something like c3, but let's say white does take. What do? This is the one situation in which case we're actually not going to get our bishop out, right? Very weird, but we're playing e6. Okay, now again, please don't play this and then just play e6. If you're going to do that in most variations, you might as well just play French. But in this case, we're only playing e6 because white captured, and we're trying to win this pawn back as fast as we possibly can, right? If a move like bishop e3, right, defending it, okay, we play knight d7, right? We're attacking two pawns at once. One of these pawns is going to drop. Right, you see something like b4, we got to go into this advanced pawn chain right away. Notice, if you take on a5, you just earned yourself two sets of double isolated pawns, plus a pawn on e5, which is a weakness. You're up two pawns, but we can literally win them back whenever we want to. Okay, so this is not very good for white. What about a move like a3? A3 isn't great because, I guess you defend a pawn, but then you just lose your rook, right? What about a move like c3? Well, in this case, we play b6, right? Again, we're just continuing to chip and chip and chip. If you take on b6, we can take with a check, even out the material, and black here, with a major edge, right? Active queen, active bishop, a knight that's ready to pounce to c6 and put pressure on e5. White has a ton of things that they got to work through, and on top of that, we have an active rook that is attacking the pawn on a2. White has an inactive rook that is defending and babysitting a pawn on a2, which is going to pay off as this game moves forward. So all that being said, taking here, not a great idea because we play e6 and we're going to win this pawn back with some solid compensation. What about a move like c3? Again, in this case, don't play e6, right? There's no reason to play e6. defending that pawn because we actually want white to take this, right? This is a general theme in this line. We want white to take this pawn. So we're just going to keep developing, right? And if we move like knight f3, pin that knight right out the gate, right? Pin that knight. Now we can play e6, and guess what? We have an active bishop, right? We have an active bishop. And, again, if white ever takes, that's more than okay, right? We're not worried about it. A lot of players may be tempted to just start taking on d4. I would say that this tension actually benefits us. Why is that? Because white taking is never good for them. So why not leave it there as an option, right? If it's not good, if white doesn't gain anything, from having that tension, if they can never take, then why would we take them, right? Why not keep that tension there a little bit? Here, if you do take, notice this very strong pawn chain just got a lot weaker. And we can just take this knight and, take off the pawn on c5. Notice as well that this knight, was also attacking e5, which we're also threatening to capture. And now we're just going to go like crazy on that pawn, right? Now that d4 has left, e5 is increasingly weak. Knight g6 is an idea here, doubling up on that pawn. If something like bishop g5, pinning our knight, okay, we play queen c7, right? We're continuing to just pile up on this e5 pawn the moment that white decide to capture away from it. Okay. And, going back to e6, if white, play solid here and decides not to take on c5, we could just take on f3 at some point, right? Take that knight. Notice here, that's a key defender of that pawn on d4. Play knight e7. We're looking to bring our knight into f5, continuing to pounce on that d4 pawn. And, if we move like bishop g5, we can just take and play queen b6, right? A key idea in the French, oftentimes in the Caro lines, we're kind of holding off on this, but at the right moment, it is extremely beneficial. Here, we're attacking the pawn on d4 and the pawn on b2. And, I'm just not seeing any way for white to hold on to both. Okay, so that's kind of a start, right? This move of c5, okay? An improved French defense. Whole idea being that you can play kind of a French defense system, but with an active bishop that actually can potentially remove a very important defender on f3 instead of having a French defense bishop that's just locked in and not doing much but cramping up your game, right? It's also worth mentioning bishop f5 is a move here that a ton of players recommend. I hate this move. I'm just going to be completely honest. I don't like it at all. This is actually why I stopped playing the Caro-Kann defense when I was a kid, because I just kept getting creamed. I felt like my bishop was just kind of sitting here. Not much of a threat, if anything, more of a target for white to try to trap it. At the very least, white could just trade whenever they want. I just didn't like it. I didn't think that it was very good. And that's just my personal experience. And I know that a lot of other players also don't like their bishop here. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But obviously, if you want to play that, then I'm sure there's other resources out there that talk about this move. Again, c5 is my recommendation for beginner players, and I think it's definitely the most dangerous. I don't think bishop f5 really poses any threat at all. I guess you're attacking a pawn, but who cares, right? The other move here that is good for intermediate players is g6, okay? So if you're intermediate or advanced, both of these moves are good, but g6 in particular, I'd probably say if you're under 1200, I'd probably stay away from this move. Because it's very positional. It's about maneuvering and gaining space and looking, for all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the moves are honestly just kind of weird. Okay, so usually for beginner players, I'm not like, hey, there's these really weird openings that are just odd. Play this, right? I don't usually say that. So okay, we have this move of g6. Most of the time, white will play something like knight f3. In that case, we're just going to fianchetto. And really, what we're going to be looking at here, guys, are the light squares, right? Here we have this move of bishop g4. If h3, that's fine. We can trade off and play e6. Notice what we're doing here. We have a dark squared bishop, right? But light squared pawns, right? A ton of light squared pawns. So this bishop is absolutely fantastic with a ton of things and a ton of range, right? I can't even tell that the pawns are there. So and that's exactly what we want, right? We don't want a French bishop, which is exactly why we traded it off. But we do want this dark squared bishop in the game, right? Very beneficial minor piece. If we move like castle and kingside, we can play knight e7, and black here with a very solid game. Knight e7 is a move there. c5 is also an idea that you can play. I kind of like the slow burn approach of playing knight e7. We're still going to be looking at playing c5, but castle and kingside is a move that we can think about. Knight d7, preparing that c5 push, and in general, when playing the Caro, throwing a rook on c8 is never a bad idea. Even if the position is not open yet, we can break it open, and having a rook there definitely doesn't hurt, right? Going back to g6, I did want to mention this move of f4 as well, and that's because I see this move all the time, and this is actually my favorite move to play against. I immediately go with the move of h5. Why don't I do this with the move of knight f3? Well, because I feel like, you know, that g5 square for this bishop, unlike right now, right, this bishop is just limited to e3. Without this pawn here, that bishop is going to be pretty cozy on g5, but in this case, the bishop's kind of just trapped behind the pawns. It feels like white, you know, thinks that they're gaining a ton of space, but we have these light squares well under control, as you're about to see. A move like knight f3, we're playing the very odd move of knight h6, bringing the knight to the rim, but for a purpose, and that is to support a move like bishop f5, right? Bishop f5 contesting on this diagonal, playing e6. Again, notice here we have, you know, a bunch of pawns on light squares and a bishop on light squares as well, but the bishop leads the pawn, which is very important. You know, at this point, we're looking at c5, which can break this game open. Knight d7 is very natural. Queen b6 is a move that we can think about as well. Eyeing the king, eyeing that pawn on b2, and the moment that you take on f5, we just take back with the knight, right? And the same ideas apply, right? c5, queen b6. You know, you could look at c5 and knight c6. You could play, you know, in some cases, you know, knight d7. But again, I think in this case, I mean, there's not much stopping c5 and just knight c6, because a move like bishop e3 can't slow things down, right? Bishop e3 can't be played because we simply win that piece and we get a fork. So yeah, I mean, going back, you know, when you see the advance, I would recommend, you know, maybe try both of these out, right? If you're over 1200, try out c5, just going into an improved French, and also try g6, right? G6 is a very annoying opening for white to play against, and I can guarantee you that they've probably never seen this before, and if they have, I doubt they've studied it super intensely, right? So this is one of those positions, in which case you're going to have a lot more experience. You're going to have the upper hand in terms of prep. And because of that, you're going to go into the middle game with more confidence. I hope that you enjoy these lines. Let me know down below what you thought of them. And let me know what you thought of bishop f5, right? I know that, bishop f5, I've talked about this before. I'm not a fan of it. But let me know down in the comment section below if you're a Caro player and like this move, or if you're with me and you simply can't stand it. Hey, thanks for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Wanted to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters for the month of June in 2023. If you haven't checked out the Patreon before, go make sure to check it out. We'd love to have you join the family, and we are continuing to add more and more benefits that you get, right, by becoming a member. As always, thanks for watching today's video, and I hope to see you in the next one.